The pregnant widow no one protected, until a cowboy took her away. This story begins with a woman whose beauty drew eyes everywhere she went, but never protection, never mercy. In the dusty Wild West town of Redstone, in the year 1884, the evening sun hung low, turning the market square golden and cruel at the same time. Wooden shops creaked in the heat, dust floated in the air, and whispers moved faster than footsteps. At the center of it all stood Holofira. She was a widow, young, extraordinarily beautiful, and painfully alone. Her husband had died only months earlier, leaving her with nothing but memories, a fragile sense of dignity, and a growing life inside her. Holofira was pregnant, and in a town like Redstone, that truth was not met with compassion. It was used against her. Her long dark hair fell softly over her shoulders, her face calm but pale, her eyes holding a quiet strength shaped by suffering. Her dress was modest and worn, yet it could not hide the gentle curve of her belly. Every step she took through the market drew attention. Men stared without shame. Some smiled in ways that made her skin crawl. Others leaned too close, pretending to speak kindly while testing how far they could go. Women turned their faces away. Not out of hatred, but fear. Fear that her fate might somehow stain theirs. Children peeked from behind skirts, sensing something heavy and sad, even if they could not name it. Holofira kept her head high. She had learned that tears invited cruelty, and silence was her only shield. Her own family offered no refuge. To them, she had become a burden. A widow with a child on the way was not a blessing, it was a problem. Rumors followed her like shadows. People spoke of her body, her past, her future, as if she were no longer human, only a story to be passed around. Each day in Redstone felt more dangerous than the last. There were moments when hands brushed her arm for too long, when footsteps followed her after sunset, when laughter echoed behind her back. She knew the town was closing in on her, slowly, patiently. Yet even in that fear, Holofira carried herself with grace. She protected her unborn child with every breath, every careful step. She promised herself that somehow, somewhere, this child would grow up far from this cruelty. What she did not know was that this very evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the market began to empty, fate was already moving toward her. From the edge of the square, unseen by most, a quiet presence observed her, not with hunger, not with judgment, but with concern. A man who had seen hardship himself. A man whose arrival would change the direction of Holofira's life forever. But for now, she stood alone in Redstone. Unprotected, surrounded, and unaware that this was the last night she would ever belong to that town. The wagon moved steadily away from Redstone, its wheels carving shallow lines into the dry earth, as the town slowly dissolved into dust behind them. Holofira did not look back. She knew that if she did, the weight of everything she had left behind, the whispers, the stares, the shame, might pull her apart before she had the chance to become something new. The land opened wide around her. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, dry grass bending beneath the wind like waves frozen in gold. The sky felt larger here, unclaimed, as if it belonged to no one and everyone at the same time. For the first time in months, Holofira felt the space to breathe. Her hand rested instinctively over her belly, fingers spread protectively, as though anchoring herself to the one truth she still trusted. The man beside her drove in silence. He did not ask questions. He did not steal glances. He did not speak her name. His presence was steady, unassuming, like a fence built not to impress but to last. That silence unsettled her at first. She had grown used to words being used as weapons. But this silence felt different. It carried no threat. The hours passed slowly. Dust clung to her skin, to her hair, to the hem of her dress. The sun climbed higher, pressing down with unrelenting force. Her body, already strained by pregnancy, began to ache. Each jolt of the wagon sent a dull reminder through her back and hips. She shifted carefully, fighting nausea and fatigue, refusing to show weakness. She had learned long ago that weakness invited cruelty. They passed abandoned homesteads. Crooked fences half buried in sand, doors hanging loose, windows hollow like empty eyes. Places where dreams had once lived, then quietly starved. Holofira wondered how many women like her had passed through this land, carrying loss in their bodies and hope in their silence. As the afternoon wore on, the prairie tested her. Her throat burned with thirst. Her hands trembled. Once, the world tilted just enough to make her grip the edge of the wagon tighter. Panic flickered through her chest. She thought of the life inside her, small, fragile, dependent on her strength. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to remain upright, to endure. That was when the wagon slowed. The man noticed before she spoke, pulling the reins gently. He offered water without ceremony, a simple act that felt heavier than kindness. She drank carefully, the metallic taste grounding her back into her body. He guided the wagon beneath the thin shade of a solitary tree and waited, patient as the land itself. Holofira rested. Not sleep, just stillness. The kind that allows pain to settle instead of explode. She watched dust drift across the horizon, listened to the wind cut through tall grass. In that quiet moment, she realized something unsettling. She felt safe. Not protected by walls or rules, but by choice. His choice. When she finally gathered herself and prepared to move on, evening had begun its slow descent. The sky deepened into shades of amber and violet. Shadows stretched longer, colder. This was the hour she feared most, the hour when danger shar. The house came into view quietly, a modest structure tucked against the land rather than standing above it. Weathered wood, a low roof, a barn leaning slightly to one side. It was not impressive. It was not grand. But it was alive. Chickens scattered as they approached. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The place breathed. Holofira stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into dry earth. Her legs trembled unused to rest. The porch creaked beneath her weight, announcing her presence before she ever crossed the threshold. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and smoke. And then she saw him. A small boy, no more than 6 or 7, stood frozen near the doorway. His hair was unkempt, his clothes patched, his eyes too observant for someone so young. He stared at Holofira, not with suspicion, but with quiet curiosity. A child who had learned early that people came and went. The man lifted the boy easily, resting him against his side. The gesture was natural, practiced. Whatever grief lived in that house, it had not erased tenderness. Holofira felt something shift. She had not walked into a stranger's home. She had walked into a place shaped by loss. As night settled over the prairie, she understood that this was no longer just a stop along the road. This was a turning point. The kind that arrives softly, without warning, and changes the direction of a life forever. And for the first time since her husband's death, Holofira allowed herself to wonder, not where she would run next, but whether she might finally be allowed to stay. The first night under that roof felt heavier than silence. Holofira lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the wind press against the wooden walls, counting the slow creaks of an unfamiliar house. Every sound reminded her that she was no longer running, but she was not yet safe either. Her hand rested instinctively on her stomach, feeling the faint movement beneath her palm, a quiet reminder that she was no longer alone in this world. The man who had brought her here kept his distance. He offered no questions, no expectations, only space. That alone unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. She had grown used to eyes that measured her worth, voices that judged her body, her past, her fate. This silence was different. It asked nothing from her. Morning came gently. Sunlight slipped through the small window, warming the room before she even opened her eyes. Outside, the land stretched wide and honest, untouched by gossip or whispers. For the first time in months, Holofira felt her breath slow naturally, not forced by fear. The boy noticed her before his father did. He stood a few steps away, curious but cautious, studying her the way children study injured birds, unsure whether to approach or step back. Holofira offered him a soft smile, not the polite kind she had learned to survive with, but a real one. He didn't speak, yet he didn't leave either. That felt like permission. Days passed quietly. She helped where she could, folding cloth, sweeping floors, preparing simple meals when her strength allowed. Pregnancy weighed on her more heavily now, the journey having taken its toll. Still, she refused to complain. Survival had taught her that gratitude was a shield. At night, memories returned uninvited. Her husband's face appeared in fragments, his laugh, his final illness, the way the town had changed the moment he was buried. She remembered how quickly sympathy had turned into hunger, how kindness had thinned into expectation. Widowhood had stripped her of protection, and pregnancy had made her a target. Here, no one touched her without consent. No one stared too long. No one asked who the child belonged to. That was when something unfamiliar took root inside her, not love, not trust, but rest. The man watched quietly from a distance, noticing small things others would miss. How she paused when standing, how she winced when she thought no one noticed, how her hand always found her belly when fear crept in. He did not offer comfort in words. He fixed broken steps, brought extra blankets, left food within reach, protection without possession. Halafira understood this language well. It was the language of someone who had lost before. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the land turned gold, she realized something that frightened her more than danger ever had. She was beginning to imagine a future that did not involve running. A future where her child would be born without shame. A place where survival did not require surrender. But peace, she knew, was fragile. And the past never stays buried for long. Unbeknownst to her, whispers had already begun traveling beyond Redstone. And some roads always lead back to where pain began. Days passed at the edge of that quiet ranch, and slowly, without anyone naming it, a rhythm formed around Halafira's presence. She was not treated as a guest, nor as a burden. She was simply there. And for the first time since her husband's death, that alone felt like mercy. The man of the house kept his distance. He rose before sunrise, left with his tools and horse, and returned only when the sky softened into evening. He never asked questions that might corner her into pain. Never stared at her belly. Never spoke of the child growing inside her as if it were a problem that needed solving. That silence, steady, respectful, began to feel safer than words. The boy, however, was different. Children notice what adults pretend not to see. He watched Halafira constantly. At first from behind doors. Then from the fence. Then closer, always curious, never cruel. He noticed how she winced when she stood too quickly. How she paused to catch her breath. One afternoon, without asking, he dragged a small wooden stool behind her so she could sit while shelling beans. That small act broke something open inside her. Halafira had learned to expect hunger in people's kindness, an unspoken price. But the boy wanted nothing. No praise. No gratitude. He only smiled and ran off, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world. Slowly, she began to help too. She swept the porch. Washed clothes in the basin. Cooked simple meals when the man returned tired and dust-covered. She never tried to replace anyone. Never crossed lines. But life has a way of stitching people together through ordinary needs. One evening, a rider passed too close to the house. Halafira saw him first. The way his eyes lingered. The way his horse slowed. The way his smile carried recognition, like a man who had seen women like her before and believed they were owed to him. Fear returned, sharp and familiar. But before the rider could speak, the man stepped forward from the barn, calm as stone, his presence firm without threat. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The rider left soon after, dust swallowing his retreat. That night, Halafira couldn't sleep. Not because of danger, but because of realization. No one had protected her like that before. Not without claiming her. Not without reminding her of what she owed in return. She rested a hand over her belly and understood something quietly, painfully clear. Safety, real safety, was rare. And she had stumbled into it by accident. As weeks passed, her body grew heavier. Movement slowed. Breath shortened. The man noticed without pointing it out. A chair appeared where she often stood. Water was brought before she asked. The boy stopped running near her, as if instinctively guarding the life she carried. And Halafira, once sold, once shamed, once chased away, began to feel something unfamiliar take root beside the child inside her. Belonging. Not ownership. Not rescue. Just space to exist without fear. But peace in the West never lasts long. And somewhere beyond the horizon, consequences were already moving toward them, slow, patient, and unavoidable. By the 5th week, Halafira was no longer a guest who lingered at the edges of the house. Without anyone formally deciding it, she had become part of the place itself, like the old table by the window or the cracked basin near the door. She did not force her presence. She never asked where she belonged. She simply showed up each day, steady and quiet, letting time decide what words never could. Her pregnancy began to show more clearly now. The soft curve of her belly was no longer something that could be hidden by loose fabric or careful posture. Yet instead of weakening her, it gave her a strange new gravity. She moved slower, yes, but with intention. Every step carried care, every breath carried awareness. This life growing inside her was not a burden to her. It was proof that she had survived something terrible, and was still standing. The ranchman, steady, reserved, and careful with his distance, noticed everything, though he spoke little. He noticed how she paused when lifting anything heavy. How she rested one hand on her lower back when the day stretched long. How she sometimes stopped mid-task, staring into nothing, as if listening to a memory only she could hear. He never questioned her, never pried. Instead, he adjusted the work quietly. A bucket would already be filled. A chair would be closer than before. Shade would be offered without announcement. The boy grew braver around her. At first, he had watched from corners, unsure where she fit in the strange puzzle of his small world. But children understand things adults complicate. He saw that she was gentle, that she never raised her voice, that she listened when he spoke, even when his words came out tangled and unsure. Slowly, he began to orbit her naturally, like something pulled in by gravity. One afternoon, while the wind rattled the dry grass outside, Halafira sat near the window mending a torn shirt. The boy sat on the floor beside her, carving lines into a piece of wood with focused seriousness. Neither spoke. Yet the silence between them was not empty, it was shared. When his small knife slipped and nicked his finger, he froze, eyes wide, more startled than hurt. Before he could panic, Halafira was already there, wrapping his finger gently with cloth, her hands steady, her expression calm. In that moment, something settled deep inside him. Trust, quiet and complete. The ranch itself began to feel different. The house no longer echoed the same way at night. There was movement again, breath, small sounds that softened the walls. The man noticed it most during the evenings. He would sit on the porch after sunset, the sky turning dark blue, and hear her footsteps inside. The faint clink of dishes. The boy's soft laughter. These sounds stirred something he had kept buried for years, something he had learned to live without. But not everyone viewed Halafira's presence with kindness. Word travels fast in empty lands. A pregnant widow living under a man's roof without a ring invited speculation. Riders passing through slowed their pace. Eyes lingered too long. Once or twice, men asked questions that carried the wrong tone. Each time, the ranchman answered with few words and an unyielding stillness that ended the conversation before it could rot further. Halafira sensed the danger even when no one spoke of it. She had lived long enough under unwanted attention to recognize its shape. But for the first time, she did not feel completely exposed. There was a boundary now, unspoken but firm. Someone stood between her and the world. Late one night, pain woke her from sleep. Not sharp, not urgent, but unfamiliar. Fear rose in her chest before she could stop it. She sat upright, breathing slowly, hands resting over her belly. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For a moment she was back in her old life, alone, unprotected, forgotten. Then the door opened. The ranchman stood there, alerted by instinct more than sound. He did not rush. He did not panic. He simply asked if she was all right. His voice was low, grounded, present. She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear. He brought water, pulled a chair closer, and stayed, just far enough to respect her, just close enough to reassure her. Nothing dramatic happened that night. The pain passed. The child remained safe. But something else changed. From that moment on, Halafira understood a truth she had not dared to name before. This place was no longer just shelter. And this man was no longer just a helper. She was no longer merely surviving. She was being held, by routine, by safety, by something slowly and quietly becoming a home. By the time the first cold winds crept down from the hills, Halafira's presence had quietly reshaped the ranch in ways no one spoke about aloud. The house no longer felt hollow at dusk. Lamps were lit earlier. Meals stretched longer. Silence still existed, but it was no longer heavy. It rested gently, like a pause instead of an absence. Halafira's pregnancy had begun to show clearly now. The curve of her belly was no longer something she could hide beneath loose fabric. Yet instead of shrinking under it, she seemed to grow steadier. Each morning she rose before the sun, not out of duty, but instinct. She watered the small patch of land she had turned into a garden, her hands patient, careful. She spoke softly to the soil, as if the land itself understood her condition, fragile, hopeful, waiting. The ranchman noticed everything, though he said nothing. He noticed how she tired more easily in the afternoons. How she paused longer before standing. How she rested a hand against her side when she thought no one was looking. Without explanation, heavier work shifted away from her. Buckets were filled before she reached them. Doors were fixed. The broken fence near the far edge of the property was repaired before she ever mentioned it. It wasn't kindness announced. It was protection done quietly. The boy changed too. At first, he had watched her carefully, as children do when they are unsure whether something good will stay. But now, he waited for her in the mornings. He brought her small things, smooth stones, feathers, bits of string he thought might matter. He asked questions about the baby without understanding what they meant. Would it cry? Would it sleep? Would it take his room? Halafira answered gently. She never replaced anything. Never promised what she could not give. She simply told him the truth, that babies arrive loud and small, that they need care, and that love is not something that runs out when shared. One evening, as the sky darkened early and the wind carried the warning of winter, Halafira felt a sharp pain low in her body. It wasn't time, but fear does not care about timing. She froze where she stood, breath shallow, eyes distant. The boy noticed first. He ran inside without being told. The man was at her side before she called out. He didn't panic. He didn't touch her without permission. He simply steadied her, helped her sit, and stayed close while the pain passed. That night, a chair appeared beside her bed. He slept there, boots off, hat on the table, listening for every change in her breathing. From that night on, something unspoken settled between them. Halafira realized she was no longer simply being sheltered. She was being chosen, day by day, moment by moment. Not for her beauty. Not for her condition. But for her presence. For the way she carried hardship without bitterness. For the way she made space for a child who was not hers. For the life growing inside her, and the calm strength she wrapped around it. The ranchman, too, began to understand something he had resisted for years. The house had not needed fixing. The land had not needed more hands. What it had needed was someone brave enough to stay soft in a hard place. And as winter approached, with its cold nights and uncertain months ahead, both of them knew, without words, that whatever came next, none of them would face it alone. The days stretched long across the open prairie, golden light pouring over the dry land, turning each ridge into a streak of warmth. Halafira had begun to feel the quiet rhythm of life here, the soft clatter of chickens at dawn, the creak of the wagon wheels on gravel, the distant lowing of cattle grazing. The ranch, once a landscape of unknown burdens, had become a place of tentative hope. She moved carefully now, aware of the life growing within her, hands resting lightly over her belly as she walked the narrow paths between the cabin and barn. Each step reminded her of fragility, and resilience at once. The ranchman, whose presence had once been a distant assurance, now moved with her in silent partnership, his quiet observation a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. Children's laughter began to echo across the yard, small and hesitant at first, as Gideon, Samson, and Mira gradually let themselves trust her. Holofira watched them, her heart tightening and loosening in ways she hadn't expected. She had carried loss, loneliness, and whispers of shame through months that felt endless. But here, with the golden lights spilling over the horizon, she sensed that new bonds could be forged. Winter winds had not yet arrived, but the ranch air carried the crisp promise of change. Holofira found herself drawn to simple acts of care, tending to small chores, mending clothes, preparing meals, arranging the cabin in ways that made the space warmer, lighter, more like a home. Her movements, once cautious, now carried quiet confidence. Even as she rested, the small household adapted around her. The ranchman's son occasionally leaned against her arm for comfort, trusting her as though she had always been a part of their lives. And yet, life was never without challenge. One morning, as Holofira walked along the fence line checking the posts, she noticed a stray calf trapped among broken rails. She felt the tension coil in her belly as she approached slowly, steadying he. Carefully, she guided the frightened animal back toward the safety of the corral. Sweat dotted her brow, her hands scraped and bruised, but she felt a surge of pride, a small victory against the unpredictable, sometimes harsh, world she had stepped into. Evenings were moments of reflection, where the prairie sun dipped behind distant hills, casting long shadows over the land. Holofira would sit on the porch steps, her hands resting lightly on her stomach, the wind tugging softly at her hair. The ranchman often joined her, not speaking, but simply sharing the quiet space, the rhythm of breath and trust filling the air. Their connection deepened not through words, but through shared presence, the understanding that protection, care, and patience were the foundation of something far stronger than fleeting affection. By the end of the week, Holofira felt a shift in herself. The heavy weight of past sorrow had not vanished, but it had softened. Here, on this rugged frontier, among people who had slowly learned to accept her as part of their lives, she discovered the possibility of joy. Each task she completed, each child's laughter, each calm glance from the ranchman was a thread, weaving a tapestry of hope, resilience, and the quiet beginnings of a new family. As night fell, stars scattered across the endless prairie sky. Holofira allowed herself to imagine a future she had once thought impossible, one where loss no longer dictated her path, where care and love could grow slowly, steadily, like the crops she nurtured in the sun-baked soil. And in that moment, she realized that survival alone was not enough. The gift of living fully, of being seen and valued, was finally within reach. As the days passed on the remote ranch, Holofira began to feel a rhythm she had never known since her husband's death. Each morning brought the sun over the rolling prairie, and with it, a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she had been missing. Her belly swelled gently with new life, and though the work on the ranch was relentless, feeding animals, repairing fences, tending the small garden, she moved through it with quiet determination. Every task became a way of proving to herself that she could endure, that she could thrive, and that she could protect the life growing within her. The rancher, whose name she had come to know as Silas, observed her from a distance, noting the subtle grace with which she managed every challenge. There was no rush to speak or declare feelings. They had both learned that trust and care are forged in small moments, in shared effort, and in silent understanding. He made sure she never had to carry a burden alone, offering help without insistence, presence without judgment. Holofira found herself watching the children as well. The boy, Samuel, was now more trusting of her, following her through the corral and listening to her instructions for feeding the animals. She found warmth in their laughter and comfort in their innocence, as if their joy helped to heal the invisible scars left by grief. Each evening, when the wind whispered across the prairie, she would sit on the porch steps, hand on her belly, feeling the gentle movements of the child within her. A life she would protect, nurture, and eventually introduce to a world she hoped could be kind. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled over the horizon, sending gusts of wind across the dry fields. Holofira and Silas worked side by side to secure the animals and gather the scattered tools. The rain began in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof, and for the first time, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Life on the frontier was never gentle, she realized, but the storms could be survived, especially when shoulders strong and steady were close at hand. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the prairie washed clean, the scent of wet earth heavy in the air. Holofira and Silas sat in quiet companionship on the porch, the children asleep inside the cabin. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, one where love, stability, and family could grow alongside her child. And as the stars glimmered over the endless expanse, she understood that while the world had been harsh, it had also led her to a place of hope, and to a man who had shown her that care, kindness, and patience could build something enduring. Holofira's heart swelled with gratitude, not only for the protection of Silas and the joy of the children, but for the gift of life she carried. Each tiny movement within her reminded her that the past, though painful, had shaped her into someone resilient, someone capable of loving again, and someone who could finally embrace the uncertain, yet promising, future. The seasons shifted slowly over the ranch. Holofira, now showing the fullness of her pregnancy, had become inseparable from the land and the family she had found. Each morning she rose with the sun, tending gardens, mending fences, and caring for Silas's young son, who had come to love her as a mother. Even the animals seemed to recognize her calm presence, gathering near her as if comforted by her warmth. Silas moved beside her, strong but gentle, never forcing his attention but always present, guiding her through the hard days of frontier life. Their connection was quiet but profound, built from shared labor, mutual respect, and unspoken understanding. The hardships they had faced, storms, broken tools, dust-choked winds, had only bound them closer. When the day finally came that Holofira gave birth, it was under the same vast prairie sky, the golden light streaming across the cabin and barn. The newborn cried, a tiny sound that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the land, blending with the calls of distant birds. Holofira held the child close, tears tracing the lines of exhaustion and joy across her face. Silas rested a hand on her shoulder, silent, grateful, and full of awe. In the months that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Children laughed in the yard, the garden flourished, and the house no longer echoed with absence but with belonging. Holofira realized that love was not a fleeting feeling but a life lived in small gestures, tending a wounded animal, soothing a frightened child, sharing a quiet look with the man who had become her husband. The prairie, once harsh and unyielding, had become home, a testament to endurance, hope, and the power of compassion. Holofira's story, once one of fear, abandonment, and uncertainty, had grown into a narrative of strength, love, and family. She had discovered that even in the harshest landscapes, kindness and courage could cultivate life, not just survive it. The legacy they built together, a family born of resilience and care, stood firm as the sun set across the rolling plains, painting their world in warm, lasting light. The first frost of winter arrived, painting the prairie with a soft, silvery glow. Holofira stood at the edge of the yard, watching her children laugh as they chased each other through the snow-dusted garden. Silas leaned on the fence beside her, hat pulled low against the cold wind, his gaze warm and steady. Together they had built a life that once seemed impossible, one born from hardship, courage, and the quiet persistence of hope. Looking back, Holofira thought of the days when the townsfolk had whispered, when judgment had followed her like a shadow. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the crushing loneliness of being widowed and carrying life inside her alone. Yet every struggle had led her here, to a place where love was not forced but freely given, where family was more than blood, and where resilience had transformed her pain into strength. The lessons of the prairie were clear. Kindness could heal wounds, patience could build trust, and courage could carve a future out of the harshest land. Holofira had learned that no matter the cruelty of others, there was always a path forward for those who refused to surrender. She had discovered that real love, steady, unwavering, and patient, was worth every sacrifice, every hardship endured. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting the sky in brilliant golds and purples, Holofira and Silas watched their children play, their laughter echoing across the ranch. Life was imperfect, challenging, and unpredictable, but it was theirs, built together through choice, care, and the belief that even in the toughest landscapes, love could thrive. And so, from the dusty, unforgiving frontier to the warmth of a home filled with life and hope, Holofira's story ended not with despair, but with triumph, a testament to resilience, compassion, and the power of human connection. If you enjoyed Holofira's journey from fear and loss to love and family, give this story a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe for more heartfelt Wild West tales of courage, romance, and resilience.